Welcome to another episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Dusek. I was the founding drummer of Maroon 5, but I'm now a licensed therapist, author, and mental health advocate. On our show today, our guest is artist and coach Marc Scheff. We had a fabulous conversation with him that we can't wait for you to listen to. Really interesting and engaging. With me, as always, is my co-host, Duck Maylard. How you doing, Duck?
I'm streamlined. I'm a lot more aerodynamic. Those of you watching the video will see I have a lot less hair.
Yeah, what happened there?
You know, I go long stretches between haircuts because I get it cut and then I forget that I have to get it cut regularly, and 3 or 4 months go by and suddenly I have a big full like 70s newscaster head of hair that I have to try to coif into something modern. So then I cut it all off, and this time they went a little short. So I'm feeling a little naked, but I'll survive.
Well, it's kind of halfway between a very modern look. You've got that coif there, and on top is kind of but then it's almost like a little military on how high the fade is, right?
Right. Well, like everything else in my life, it's all dictated by my career. And I always have to try to have conversations with hairdressers about, like, I want to leave it a little long so I can make it messy if I want to be a dirtbag, but it also has to look like a lawyer and a cop. And it's an impossible challenge. And I'm probably a really annoying customer, but and I keep going to different people because I'm like, I didn't like what the last person did. Let me try this person. And I bounce from stylist to stylist. My wife thinks I'm crazy. I should just find somebody and stick with them. How you doing this week?
I'm doing well. I've been, I feel like I'm a broken record, just getting more and more busy with my practice and the show, which is good. You know, I feel like we're kind of having a little moment of like rejuvenation with the show. We kind of redecorated in here, and we are rethinking a lot of things about how we're going to take this thing to the next level. So it's
important. It's important to keep growing, keep moving. You know, I think even a show that's only a year old like ours can get stale if we just sort of don't keep trying to push it and make it better. So I think it's good for us just to mix things. It's like rearranging your bedroom. It makes you feel like you're living in a new place, you know?
Well, also, I think on topic for this show, it's when you add an element of creativity to something that's becoming a little bit formulaic, that puts me into a state that I feel more inspired, you know? Yeah. So whether that is as simple a thing as let's try redecorating the furniture, or it's like, how are we going to approach this conversation in a little different way than we've done before?
Right.
I know that, look, most shows have a formula and we want to be on point in terms of things. Yeah, we don't want it to be free form, but at the same time, you know, it is a show hosted by two creative people, and we're trying to get to, you know, feelings and we have to use a little bit of intuition to try to figure out the best ways to do that, right? So I think there's a level of creativity I'd like for our lives with the podcast to incorporate a level of creativity on a consistent basis.
Speaking of that creative mind, did you ever, I know the timeline of Kara's Flowers, and then, you know, you guys lost the record deal, so you kind of had to go back to normal life before Maroon 5. Did you ever have like a 9 to 5 job, just like a boring, I worked as a data entry guy? Because I had tons of jobs like that. And I was curious if you ever did or no. You were luckily you were able to avoid that.
I had 2 office jobs. I can't say that either of them were really normal 9 to 5 jobs because there was definitely a certain amount of nepotism involved.
Okay.
One of the first one, I might have still been in high school or right out of high school. Maybe it was the summer after I graduated. I was just trying to make a little money because I think I was going to be living on my own for the first time, you know, going to college and stuff. And so my dad offered me to do secretarial work in his office for a little while. Okay. And actually he said that I was one of the best secretaries he ever had because I could type really fast and I'm super hyper organized.
Yeah.
So like everything in a matter of a couple of weeks was like streamlined in that office.
Like, you can't leave. You can't leave. You need to stay.
I was like, you need to pay me more money, Dad.
Yeah, right.
But that was, like I said, I don't think that you could really compare that to any other sort of menial job because I had a lot of leeway with my dad and the other people in that office. But in the time period that you're talking about, after our first record deal, when we got dropped from our label, I had a little bit of money still because we had gotten an advance and a buyout of our contract that I was kind of using to get through the end of college and paying for my apartment and my living expenses. But we had another record deal that was not finalized yet as I was graduating college. We're getting ready to, at some point soon, record what became Songs About Jane. But I was running out of money and paying for an apartment every month. And like, okay, I was doing the math. I'm like, well, if I can, should I put a certain amount on my credit cards? And then when I get the advance from the next record deal, I'll just pay it off. And I was like, that's a little risky for my taste. So I started asking around, and actually our business managers, the people who were doing our tax filings and all of that stuff, and hadn't had any work from us in years since our first record deal.
Right.
I asked them if they needed anyone in their office to do any menial tasks or anything. And they're like, yeah, sure, come on in. So I actually was a filer, I wasn't in one office the whole time. Like each day I'd come in and the office manager would assign me to somebody else's office to come in and like organize their files.
Yeah.
So that was the closest to a 9-to-5 job, because I would be there more or less from 9 to 5. And I was just in an office building, really just doing office work. However, at the same time, because I was this person they brought in for, I don't know, whatever reason, I could like, I can't believe I'm admitting this.
Ooh.
Sometimes they would say like, well, tomorrow you're going to be in such and such's office. And then I would show up and the person would say, oh, I didn't know I was going to have an extra person today. And so I'd realize usually they wouldn't know that I was actually coming that day. So I could show up at like 10 o'clock.
Gotcha.
And then they'd be like, oh, they only had we don't have that much work for you. We only have like 3 hours of work for you today. So I'd do 3 hours and then I'd be out at or I'd take like a long lunch and then leave early. Right. But I got paid for the whole day. So I had it good is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I had a lot of, even before I left high school, I had a bunch of, I worked at a stationery store, which there's a story coming on about that one. And this is talk about true confessions here. So if you guys are listening, the people at Williams Stationery in Boonton Township, New Jersey, I apologize. I stole from that store. It started off very small. So I got the job because of a guy that I knew was going off to college, and he had the job. But right before I left, he's like, here's what you can do. It's an old school cash register where if you mistakenly ring up $50 instead of $5, you just write minus 45 on this little pad. And then at the end of the day, when they tally up the receipts, they'd be like, oh, there was a $45 mistake. The drawer's $45 short. We're all good. So he taught me that it was like, you can just do that and you can take out $20. And so I was like, okay, little things like that. And I'd do that. I'd steal some candy before I left my shift. But anyway, this one day I decided I was stealing like bus ticket to New York, because I used to go from New Jersey to New York to go skateboard or see theater or something. And I stole some bus tickets, whatever. And the boss came back at the end of the shift, and he didn't normally do that. And he came back, and I saw him going through the bus ticket receipts and corroborating. And I was like, oh God, I'm busted. And it was the worst feeling. I had that flop sweat. And then I saw him on the phone and be like, this is Elliot at the Williams Stationery. We have a big problem. Come up here. I didn't know. I thought he was calling the police. I'm trying to all of a sudden I see my mom is walking in. She goes, what's going on? I'm like, what? I don't know what. And he turned, you are a liar. You're a thief. You stole. And I had to take this in front of my mother. God. The shame, it was literally the worst feeling of my life. The shame of letting down my mom. And it was just it was $40, $50. It wasn't grand larceny, but it was like I had a job. I was responsible, and I blew that responsibility by stealing money, and I got fired, obviously, and my mom had to pay out of her bank account to repay them so they wouldn't press charges. And it was something that took months to sort of rebound from the respect of my mother. I had to hide my face as I walked past the stationery store, and I remember that feeling so vividly, and it was the worst shame I had ever felt. And I just, I think about that now in terms of jobs that I have, and when people put their trust in you and you sort of let them down, and God, I never want to feel that way again. That's for sure. So I stopped stealing at that point. That was my career as a thief ended there.
Well, it sounds like there's a happy ending to that story in that it fostered in you this commitment to being honorable in your...
That's true. We've talked about in the past how I hated injustice. So it seems kind of counterintuitive that I would have done this. But like I said, it felt like a victimless crime in the moment, because I was like, it's just a piece of candy here. It's $10 here.
My dad gave me, I have two memories that were around this topic that my dad gave me a good lesson on honesty and honorability about stealing and that sort of thing. I was not somebody who was inclined to do those things in the first place, but for whatever reason, this one day, my friend Yumi and I were walking around the Beverly Center. I must have been, I don't know. I obviously was old enough that we were just the two of us. My parents had dropped us off at the mall.
Yeah, but it was the 80s. You could have been 7.
It was the 80s. Yeah, I could have been, honestly. I must have been not, I couldn't have been more than 9, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah.
And if you've ever been to the Beverly Center, it's like a lot of malls, there's kind of like a center area where you can see all the way up from the bottom floor up to the 3rd floor. And there was a toy store there. I can't remember what it was called, but right in the entryway, there was this big barrel of these little like military plastic men with like paratroopers.
Sure.
With like they were like 99 cents or something like
little
that.
Plastic army men like in Toy Story.
Yeah. And we were like, we didn't have any money or anything. We were just wandering around. I don't know if we'd maybe gone to a movie and gotten out and we were just walking around or something. But we grabbed one of those. And because we wanted to go, like, have him paratroop from the top of the Beverly Center all the way down.
Right? 5
yeah,
levels.
so I can't remember if I was the one dropping the paratrooper and he was down at the bottom or the other way around. But we did it, and then it was very exciting. Yeah. And then my dad came to pick us up, and we were all excited. We were like, "Oh my God, it was so cool!" And we dropped the and they're like, and he stopped us in our tracks, and he says, "Well, where did you get this paratrooper guy?" And we're like, "Oh, from the toy store." And he said, "Did you buy it?" I was like, "No, it's just like a barrel by the front door. There's like 100 of them in there." And he's like, "So you stole it?" And I was like, "Well, I guess technically." And he's like, "No, okay, we're going to go back to the toy store and you're going to pay 99 cents for that." And I was like, "Really?" And he's like, "Yes, absolutely, really. You're not going to steal. And it doesn't matter whether it's 99 cents or $99 or whatever." And so we did. And we had to walk back in there and show him, we took this, and at the front. And of course, the person behind the counter probably could care less.
16-year-old kid, like, I don't care. 2, 3, 4.
But I remember another occasion, one time, just like walking around the grocery store, they had like one of those little dispensers of like candy. And just like taking
the bulk candy or whatever.
Yeah, where you make a bag for yourself and then you weigh it. And I remember like grabbing like a piece of, I don't know what, a jujube or something.
Right.
And eating it. And my dad was like, "What are you eating?" It's like, "I got a piece of candy." And he's like, "You just took it?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Oh, put it in a bag. We're gonna pay for it." And I was like, "You gotta be kidding me." But it was like, I don't know. I mean, I guess at the time I was like, "Wow, you're really a stickler." But I guess it did instill something in me. It's like, well, be honorable.
Yeah, but it's also a testament to what a noble and sweet kid you were, because both times that you stole, you weren't even doing it like intentionally. You were just sort of like, yeah, we just got, like, when I stole stuff, I was like, yeah, I'm stealing this. I'm doing stuff. But there's nothing better than a kid trying to explain, like, no, I had found this guy came out and he was like, "You can have this," and like they're just trying to bullshit their way through it. Yeah, I don't know if you've seen the clip of a kid. I don't even know where it was, like a kid whose mom walked in on him, and maybe he was looking at something on the internet that he shouldn't have, and he's trying to explain it. He's like, "No, there was a virus, and I was trying to get rid of the virus, and I stood up, and I was so surprised that my pants fell down, and I was just trying to pull them." Like, he's just so obviously caught. But yeah, kids will do anything to kind of explain away. And as parents, we're like, we know what you were doing. You obviously stole that. But you're trying, and it's almost amusing listening to them try to bullshit their way through because they haven't developed that skill yet.
Yeah. Okay. I have to tell the other story that it was the one I was reluctant to, because now you're stumbling kind of onto it more.
Yeah.
And it is something that, thinking back to it now, it's like, this is just a story that I've never told anyone, and no one's going to know it except for my parents.
Okay.
And it lives in shame, and it's so silly that it lives in shame. So this will be freeing for me to tell.
I love it.
I was in the 3rd grade, which I don't know, you 8 years old when you're in the 3rd grade?
Sounds right. Yeah.
And I don't know what was going on in class, but me and a couple other kids are at the back of the class fooling around, and I'm doodling, and I draw a penis and balls.
Like you do.
Like you do when you're 8 years old. However, there was a young girl sitting close by who was very offended by this.
Yeah.
So I quickly balled it up because she was upset and threw it in the trash can. She goes into the trash can, pulls it out, opens it up, and takes it to the teacher. The teacher looks at it and looks up. I see her point at me. The girl points at me like he drew it.
And your heart
so the teacher calls me over, tells me, take this to the principal's office. So I have to go and wait for the principal with this drawing
cock
I
and
made
ball in
of
your,
a balls in my hands. And okay, so I'm going to tell you my memory of it and then my parents' memory of it. But so the principal gives me the instruction, says, you have to take this home tonight and have your parents sign it and bring it back tomorrow.
Do they have to sign along on it?
The principal wanted me to know that I had showed what I'd done to my parents. And I'm going through my mind how embarrassing this was and how now I'm feeling like, oh my God, this is so shameful. I mean, I didn't even have shame attached to body parts at that point. But in that moment, I don't know if it was the teacher or the principal that was creating this shame in me or what it was. But I went home after school and from 3 o'clock until dinner time, I was sitting around full of anxiety, panicking. What am I going to do? I'm going to have to admit to my parents that I did this horrible, shameful thing. And so in my memory, the sun had gone down. I maybe even I sat through dinner and I couldn't even do it. And then finally we're all sitting around watching Cheers or whatever that night. And I walk into the other room and I get it and I'm getting up the courage. Then I finally walk in and I go and I put it down and I just sit there and I'm and they're okay, what's, and then I told them the principal said I have to get inside and bring it back. So in my memory, it was a very serious moment. And it was Ryan did something really bad and we're gonna have to deal with it, you know. And
he may be a sex offender.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In their memory, I came in with this thing. They opened it up, and they were trying so hard not to laugh.
Of course they were. Of course.
And apparently they had to go in and talk to the principal, and all three of them were trying so hard not to laugh. Ryan, it's not appropriate to draw, body parts in class. But they were all kind of looking at each other I can't believe we have to do this. This is so silly. In my memory, it was oh my God, I'm in the principal's office and my parents are here and I'm in trouble for doing something terrible. Yeah. So, and now I'm saying it out loud. I realize how it's been living in the mind of an 8-year-old since then and how shameful it feels.
I have so many more things that we this could go another half an hour of well, there's a time that I shot a hole in the window with the BB gun and insisted it wasn't me, and my parents were of course it was you. It's no, it was a guy. There was a guy. He drove down the driveway and he was mad. I have so many of these stories. So let's just say I was a little shit. And that's where your acting chops were honed. All of those stories you had to craft. Because back then I was terrible at it. I think now I can get away with it. So.
There's a lot that's dovetailing in what we're talking about with what comes up in the conversation about the mind of a child and the creativity and the process of fostering creativity.
Yeah.
And why we do it, which we get into in this absolutely amazing conversation with Marc Scheff, which I'm excited for our listeners to hear. Marc Scheff is an artist originally who has become a coach who works with creative people, not just creative people, all kinds of people, but about perfectionism, about overcoming blocks to creativity and making progress in your projects in life. And his platform really kind of resonated with me because of the elements of perfectionism, fear, and embracing the mess, letting go of the kind of control that is an issue for me often in my life, and I'm sure a lot of people, creative people or otherwise, can relate to in terms of wanting to create some order out of the chaos. Marc was really, really great at just being honest and opening up to us and being vulnerable, which we always appreciate on this show.
We value it here because it's nice. It's nice to create a place where we can all kind of lean into that and don't have to, don't feel like we have to hide anything. We can just let it all hang out. Create some chaos from the order.
Yeah, there you go.
Flip it back the other way.
Yeah. All right. So without any further ado, here's our conversation with Marc Scheff right here on the Harder to Breathe podcast. Marc Scheff, welcome to Harder to Breathe.
Thank you. Great to be with you guys.
This is great to have you on the show and great to meet you finally. I read a little bit about you online and tried to kind of figure out what makes you tick without having a conversation first, but it's going to be a lot better, I think, hearing it straight from the horse's mouth. Because you are an artist and a creative type and a feeling person, I want to try a little something different.
A feeling person.
As
opposed to those automatons.
How do you know that?
Usually
Okay,
have.
you just saw right into me.
Well, that's the term I use because, we have a lot of like executive types sometimes on the show,
Sure.
and, getting feelings out of them
Guys that don't
sometimes
feel.
can be like pulling teeth, and that's nothing outside of the normal, outside of Harder to Breathe in the world as it is on the show. But it's always lovely to have somebody who's a fellow creative on the show.
Yeah. That's why I'm very glad to be here for the exactly that reason. I am a paint, my background is in painting and visual arts, but I have been on stages. I have been a front man for a very, very small, we were a cover band called On the Rebound in San Francisco.
It's a good title.
Nice.
Yeah, we didn't
Awesome.
last long, but we had a good time.
What kind of stuff did you cover?
Well, we almost called ourselves the Bare Naked Chili Peppers because that was most of our repertoire.
Perfect.
Love that.
That really puts you in a very specific timeline.
Very specific. Yeah,
Right
exactly.
there.
It was, late 90s, early 2000s.
Gotcha.
We're definitely of the same generation, it sounds like. So, I was intrigued by some of the stuff talk about in your coaching in terms of perfectionism and overcoming blocks to creativity. And I want to get into all of that because it resonates with me. But to get things rolling here, I want to try something a little different. I want to ask you, this is something I sometimes start my therapy sessions with. This is not a therapy session. I just kind of want to bring it into the present moment right now. How are you feeling right in this moment? What are you feeling in your body?
It's a good question. I actually feel kind of like a little bit of resistance here. We've got a lot going on in our lives. My wife and I, we have 2 kids, 2 dogs, and we're about to move. So I'm kind of shutting down this space where I've been for the past 12 years. Getting rid of a lot of things, also looking a lot of things that I'm like, well, I meant to get to that, but I never did. And I guess that's not happening. So there's a lot of mixed feelings. And I think there's kind of there's like a little bit of there's an excitement for the next adventure, but there's like also a heaviness of, of letting things go. Mm-hmm. I like the process of letting things go. I think it can be and it's some of the work that I do with creatives is about, kind of what are you holding on to? But at the same time, it is a process, and I am really in the middle of it today. I can almost feel like a lump in my throat, even just like talking about it.
So what are you resisting letting go of? What's hard to accept you have to let go of?
Well, I think it's funny. I have this like idea in my head that we all are doing a little bit of mourning every day. Like the person that we were yesterday is gone. We think about this like, and I mean, I know you guys have been through this, the person that you were, in the band or in the TV show or, whatever, that's over. That's over. That's gone. That person is gone in a way. So I think there's a part of me there's a part of all of us that sort of resists like, but I could still do that, but like, but I'm on a different path now, on this path of coaching and working with creatives in a different way. And, people ask me like, oh, have you given up your art? No, I'm not doing it the way that I was doing it. Like and I'm also not that person for a lot of really good reasons, but I think there's a resistance to, and I was actually just writing about this in my newsletter this morning, like, I'm an ADHD person too. So I've got systems upon systems, and I like, and I get through my day. I've got morning rituals. I've got, ways that I think about things. I've got grounding rituals. I've got, self-care, self-love. Like I've got all these things that I do. And there's also a point at which it's not so much going through the motions, but I was working with some people this week where we sort of got very curious about okay, so what are the systems that I'm using? So to answer your question, there's like a little bit of resistance of letting go of systems as well. We're about to go through a move. So I'm moving out of this studio, out of this house, and I have a great set of systems that just, are locked in, like every morning I get up and I take my kid to school and I go do my training. I train jujitsu, which is, I was saying, you can see a little bit of a faded black eye here, and that's all going away. And I've got to create new systems. And so there's sort of a good side to this, which is it has to happen. And the thing that sort of keeps me stuck and creative stuck, I think, is when we have this resistance and don't have to change. I mean, we're moving, so it has to change. But if I wasn't, I might just sit here with all of this unfinished stuff for years, and that would actually be a worse outcome. But it's still not, it's not clean. It's this strange. Have you all heard of the Hoffman process?
No.
Okay, yeah. Look it up. This is deep stuff. It's a week long. You go to a retreat center. There's tons of them around, not tons, but there's a bunch around the world. You're there for 7 days. They take your phone. You are off the grid, and you do this like really deep work. And one of the things that I really took from that was this idea that this both and idea. You said, how are you feeling? Well, there's this sense of adventure, and there's also a sense of heaviness. It's not just like, it's not just toxic positivity. It's not just like, well, just tune into the happiness. It's like, well, what if you tuned into everything? Because it's all there. Yeah. And I think we make our best work when we can sort of acknowledge that that's there and not try to pretend like it can go away. I have these feelings of, nostalgia and letting go about what's happening in my life right now. In my marriage with my kids, they're getting older. The times that we had, they're gone. So there's always a little bit of mourning. It sounds kind of dark, but
no. It's funny that I'd never heard the term toxic positivity, but it's a great kind of encapsulation of something that I often bump against, which is that sort of blinder approach to like, hey man, just be positive, just feel love. Like, no, we have to I said very early on when we were doing this podcast, like, when I had a newborn child, I was miserable. Everyone was telling me how beautiful and wonderful it was. And I was like, no, I want someone else to acknowledge that this sucks, like getting up at 3 a.m. and changing diapers. And when I found a community who was like, yeah, it sucks, I felt so seen and I felt supported. And the same thing goes for like these beautiful transitions in our lives, where whether it's Ryan, leaving the band, or me, my career not going the way I wanted it to, and acknowledging that, hey, maybe we're going this direction. There's sometimes a feeling of shame. When people say to you, hey, do you not paint anymore? Is there a feeling of like defensiveness and shame? Or are you kind of like pushing back, like, no, but I'm doing this other stuff that's just as fulfilling. You know what I mean? Like there's definitely that feeling of feeling attacked when someone is pointing out the thing that you used to do that you're no longer doing.
Yeah, you got to pretend it's great. Like, no, it's good. I'm doing this drawing. Yeah. I'm doing this.
I didn't want to be on a TV show anyway. That's too much of a hassle. So God, I love the toxic positivity as a term.
I can relate to all of this so much in so many ways. I'm just going back through my life and all the times I've experienced the things that you're describing. Mm-hmm. And it reminds me, when I started grad school to get my master's in clinical psychology, one of the first books I read was by one of the professors at Pepperdine University. And it was kind of just like, he called them meta thoughts on thoughts, the way we think about things. And one of the things that was in there was about how everything is a trade-off. We tend to think like, oh, if we do this one thing, it's going to improve our lives in every way. And if we do this other thing, it's going to make our lives worse in every way. The reality is that everything is a trade-off, and there's pros and cons to every choice and every transition and everything you do. Even if you get the job that you dreamed of your entire life, even if, Duck, you woke up tomorrow and you got the lead in a serial that's going to go on for the next 10 years and make you rich, you're going to have to give up a lot of things.
Yeah, I got to move to Iceland to film.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, yeah. No, yeah. I mean, I've had those decisions too, and it's something that my wife and I talk openly about. I've always supported her career. She's trained as a lawyer, and she does some great. She runs a foundation now, and there have absolutely been opportunities that have come my way that that I've turned down because I have kids or because it just doesn't work, with our schedule. And, so I've made this decision, for example, to have kids, which, gets in the way of everything.
Talk about pros and cons.
Yeah, right.
Right. I do something with my clients called kind of like an energy, tune up or audit. And, you have 2 columns where it's like, okay, so just list all the things in your life. And this is actually how I got through one of my major life transformations. Like, so what are the things that, give you energy when you're done with it, or people when you're done with them, and then what takes energy. So we can all think of people where like, they're a drain, they're a real drag. I should spend less time with them. And kids are in both columns. They're just firmly in both,
Right.
But like you say, it's funny you said, Doctor, about the first year. One of my, actually my wife's cousins gave a friend of mine some great advice, which I'll never forget. He said, the first year of your first kid is going to be the worst year of your marriage.
Yeah.
So, maybe it's not that bad, but on relative, everything else is going to be better. And the first year of the second kid, same. I can confirm this. And what's interesting about that is it's another kind of like not forced transition. You chose it, but it's like we're on the track to move. Like that's that's happening. So I've got to get out of here one way or the other, and I can do it in this sort of thoughtful over a course of a few months, which is a little less stressful. Or I can pretend it's not happening, but that doesn't mean it's not happening. I can have this kid and pretend like I'm not going to have a toddler, but like, God willing, I will.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and I have to think about these things, or, put another way, I get to think about these things. I get to be creative in this space. And that's a little bit of the mind shift that I like to, you said something too, Ryan, about, sort of, if I get this one thing, then I'll be happy. There's no thing that's true. Right. But we can also start to think about these small, micro changes in our habits and our lives that do actually have an impact on other areas. It's an interesting thought exercise that I do with a lot of my private clients, and I do with my creative community, where we kind of look at all the areas of your life and give it kind of a loose rating and sort of talk through, okay, so like where am I with these things? And then we say, okay, well, like, look, if you had to look at one area of your life, health, money, career, education, personal growth, love, romance, friendships, all joy, fun, all that stuff. If you could only make one a little bit better, which is the one that would just sort of naturally have an impact on the others? And I'm always surprised by what people say, mostly because it's always different. Some people are like, I want to feel better in my body. I'm like, I thought we were talking about your career, but but so did they. We often get into these conversations and people go, most people, when they get coaching, they want more money, they want more success. These are, confidence. These are the things. But when we dig into like what is actually, having an impact on those things, it's never just their industry, their boss, their whatever. It's their family, their lives, the way they treat their body, the way the thoughts they have on thoughts. These are the things. I know you all as creatives have experienced this.
And like you say, the trick is keeping it all in balance. For some reason, my mind is going to, this is a weird metaphor, but stay with me. I was watching Chernobyl on HBO a couple of months ago. I rewatched it, and the explanation that the expert gave on, initially the uranium heats the water, but then we add graphite to cool it down, and then we add this to heat it up, and it's this perfect balance of heating and cooling. When something gets out of whack and we miss a step, suddenly the heating expands too quickly, and we have a meltdown. And it's an apt metaphor for our lives, where we have the joy of marriage, we have the chaos of kids, we have the joy of a career, we have the loss of the death of a parent. We have all these things that kind of keep us going up and down. And when one of those things just gets to an extreme where we can no longer deal with it, we have a nuclear meltdown. And the trick, whether it's through therapy, whether it's through a community, whether it's through medication, whatever, whether it's through creating art, is regulating that so nothing gets too high, nothing gets too low. And again, that's the trick. Whether or not we can do it is that's the secret. Right.
Yeah, I think there's a particular challenge for people who are creative to do what you're describing, and especially because a lot of creative people
meltdown.
Well, yeah, like I said at the top, we're feeling people. We're given this gift, which is the gift of expression. We're given a coping mechanism, a way to try to deal with the things that are going on inside of us through
a built-in pressure release valve that some people might not have.
Yeah.
Right. But at the same time, we tend to be people that are predisposed to sensitivity, to feeling things very deeply, to perhaps chaos in our minds, in our hearts, in our lives, whether it's ADHD or it's, a bipolar disorder, or these things tend to coexist with creative people to a higher degree than the general public. So, Marc, I'm curious, when you're working with people that are creative, is the challenge greater than working with the general public of people that don't have that both gift and curse? And, or if so, what do you do to kind of work through that with people that might be experiencing different challenges than people who aren't inclined that way?
So what's sort of the difference between the creative and the normies?
Well, yeah, no, and just do you see that in your work with these people? Is that an issue in terms of what creative people deal with comparatively?
Yeah, I mean, I think you put it really well. We are sort of feeling people. Before I transitioned from my art career into my coaching career, I spent a lot of time researching and reading and applying to grad programs for art therapy. So didn't go through the program, not an art therapist, but one thing I walked away with was a very clear idea of the history of how they've discovered that art, is a healing practice, or it can be, right? And as professional creatives, in various ways, we also know that that's not always true. Like sometimes it just sort of sucks to be creating, because you're sort of creating and it's, maybe it's not getting you what you want. And most of the time, the things that, that we're not getting are external. But something that I walked away with is that it is a healing practice. And so if we can, when I work with creatives, a lot of times, we're getting back to, I don't know how else to put it, kind of like the joy of that process, of that creative process. Like what is so exciting and what is so skillful about what we do. I have this theory, this make a mess theory, that we are in a way sort of designed, or we have a proclivity towards and have nurtured this skill of creating kind of order out of chaos, whether you're, throwing tons of ideas down for a script and then, making it into something or multiple somethings, or music or art, any of these things. A lot of what we're doing, it relies on us having some chaos. Like we have to have some chaos. Otherwise, you're an accountant. Like if you're going from here to here, it's not, there's creativity. I hope there's some creativity in that accounting. At least when I talk to my tax person, I hope there is. But I'd like her to be a little creative. IRS. Hopefully they're not listening. No, we're always above board, guys. But yes. But yeah, like when I work with creatives, one thing that's a little bit different is that they're already a little bit familiar with this idea. Or sure. At least they've seen it in a way. So when I talk to them about it, like you guys, like they're kind of going, oh yeah, that makes sense. So again, how do we use that chaos, or accept or integrate or have balance with that chaos, so that we're also, we're not just chaos monsters, like we're actually making something out of these things. I have the other thing over here is create, destroy, emerge. This is kind of how I think about the creative process of this creation of chaos. Obviously, there's real world limits. Like you don't just run out in the street naked and see what happens. Like there's chaos that you. I don't know.
Shouldn't do that.
Maybe
shouldn't
duck.
do that.
Okay, duck as the exception.
Note taken.
I'm within eye shot of the Brooklyn Nets, duck. I don't know if you realize this.
Oh.
Yeah, right. We're right here near Barclays.
Talk about my heart hurting and
I
chaos.
know, but I'm going to run over there naked after the show.
Good. That could only help the team.
Well, you create this sort of mess of ideas, as I'm sure both of you have done at various times, especially with big career transitions. You have to kind of think not outside the box, but just sort of going, well, what are the million things that I could be doing? Because there are lots of options. Many of them you don't want to do, and that's why you destroy a bunch of them. You put a bunch of stuff down and you go, you know what? Definitely not, being a professional streaker, I don't want to do that. And then, definitely not. And then you sort of look at what's left, and then this is the emerge phase where you kind of go, well, if these are the things that are left, what does that actually look like for my career, for my painting, for my writing? I think it's a beautiful process, and I think it's a process that creatives understand, because that is the process that they're getting in touch with. I also, when I work with people who are, non-creatives, this is going to sound how it sounds, but everybody is creative. Everybody is creating things. You are creating your life at all times. Every day when you wake up, maybe you have a system and a routine and a bunch of things, but there are things that you're creating. You're creating relationships with your family. You're creating dynamics at work. You're creating a new company. You're creating a social movement. I've worked with all these different kinds of people. And this process that I'm talking about, it is the process of getting people kind of unstuck. I think that's such an overused term these days, but it, it sort of works. When if I can take someone who is, who sort of sees themselves as a non-creative and support them, give them the space, give them the encouragement to be in the creative process. What I've seen, are some, truly incredible results when they actually lean into that.
Yeah. Like I said, I don't think it's a bad thing to say that it's not like creative people are more evolved. I think it's just we're further along in that process. So like you say, we're already, oh yeah, I was crying before I got here, or something. But the inverse is true as well. An analytical mind might be way more evolved and a lot further along in getting some order in their life and in their career. And if you're coaching someone to that, they might say, oh yeah, I've already got a plan, I've already got a to-do list. And a creative might be like, what, I have to write stuff down, So it reminds me of the and I'm sure you've done this, Mark, as an artist. There's an art exercise that we used to do with my son where you just scribble on a paper and then you look at it and you try to find it, and then you create something out of the scribble. It's literally creating order out of chaos. And it's such a great exercise because it forces your mind to kind of to find some beauty in what is ostensibly just a scribble. So
I feel like I'm a bit of an anomaly in that it's sort of a paradox of both extremes that you're describing rolled into one person. Yeah. Because, I've always been a sensitive guy. I've always been a feeling person. And I've gone to, first it was... Actually, writing came before music for me. I used to write creative writing a lot when I was a kid, and then music became my big passion. And that was a place where I kind of let all the rules go and could just go with the flow. And then, of course, I came back to writing later in my life. But all along the way, I've always been a control freak. I've always been very analytical. And you talk about having systems in place, things that make me feel like I have order. And whether it was in the band, it was being the guy who's, organizing everything and trying to make sure everyone's on time and that we have everything lined up on the schedule and that we're finishing everything we start, having the work ethic and all that. Or it was, later in writing the book, I laid out an outline and I made sure everything was there and all the information I needed to compile was there and it was like labeled. And but at the same time, I had to realize at a certain point, and I think in music, Adam Levine, who could be frustrating to me because he was on the opposite end of the spectrum as an ADHD kid, he taught me a lot about, messiness and just going with the flow and letting go, because you had to with him in order to keep up, because he's so creative and sort of impulsive, and I had to let go of the reins just to kind of go wherever it was going to take us. And when I left the band, I was really stunted for like maybe a decade with perfectionism, which is another issue of mine, because everything I would create or write was never good enough. It was never done right when I started it. And when I finally got down to writing my story, I realized that no matter how structured everything is, no matter what systems I have in place to make sure I can create order out of this, I had to put something on the page. I had to just start writing and put something down and accept the fact that it's going to be bad. It is not going to be a finished product. I'm going to write a paragraph. It's going to be poorly written. It's not going to be organized in the way that I want it to in terms of the flow of thought. But it's going to be something on the page that I can work with to then craft and recraft and revise and edit until it does turn into something that really works. So I feel like I had to rely on both to reach my potential as an artist. I don't think I could ever really fully, completely let go of some systems in place and a sense of wanting to create order out of the chaos. But at the same time, I had to give myself enough leeway to let it suck, to let it be messy before I could go into that process of refining.
Yeah. And did you have, when you were, post-band, when you're writing the book, I'm just curious about this, because I think that I have all these different ideas. I think that transformation and change, like these are things that are in big and small ways done in collaboration. You know, in the most basic sense, like we are always in collaboration with the world around us, but sometimes you're in collaboration with a bandmate. Sometimes, you know, we have this creative community and there's lots of collaboration going on there. So maybe they don't have, maybe you have a very organized person. They don't have necessarily like an Adam Levine on their team, but there's somebody like that in the room that can kind of be, you know, give them some ideas about how to get past the, you know, and similarly, you know, you have someone who, you know, who is, you know, very, you know, maybe disorganized or very, you know, very messy, and have someone else say, oh, I see a way that you could do, you know, create some order out of this. And they go, oh, great. But what are your, I'm curious about the process of writing the book. You know, where was the push to chaos where was the push to letting go of the order coming from?
Well, it was interesting because, like I said, for a long time, and granted, I was in the throes of anxiety, depression, and alcoholism in that decade in between. But during that time, you know, as I said, I would sit down to try to write something, and I'd write a paragraph, and then I would just throw it away, and I would feel defeated. The thing that got me out of that, the thing that made me realize that I had to kind of push through and just embrace the suck as a way of getting something out there and then working with it, was that I went back to school and I had to write papers and I had to turn them in. And there was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It was just something that needed to be done. And actually, it's a weird combination because being the sort of hyper organized person that I would always start projects early. And you would think, well, that's not most creative people do their best work when they're under the gun. They're not hyper organized like that. But I was thinking to myself, oh, I've got 3 weeks until this first assignment is done. Most people are going to wait until that last week. I'm going to start right now because I need to give myself as much time as possible to get it as perfect as I want it to be. But I realized there is going to be an end date, a forced end date. And I might as well get something down now so that I can be ahead of the game.
Yeah.
Even though I know it's not going to be finished. Because if I start that last week, it was the anxiety of coming up to that deadline that forced me, first off, to start early and to embrace the fact that the first draft is not going to be very good. And so once I did that, and then I actually had to get into this process of engaging with the thing that I had sort of vomited out, the brainstorming process, I realized I actually enjoy that process. The process of taking something I've already created and trying to make it better. And so I feel like, you know, writing is rewriting, and you have to kind of put something on the page and then work with it. And then, you know, you're never sort of done. We discovered this in recording albums. You know, you're never done. You just surrender. You have to, it's like there's an end date. It's like the record label's not going to spend any more money on this. You just have to give up and say, okay, we did the best we could and put it out.
So it's almost like the fear of that chaos kept you from starting, right? Like you're talking about the duality of chaos and order. It's almost like your fear of your perfectionism and your fear of having to wade through that chaos would keep you from getting started.
Yeah, Mark, do you run into that a lot? Is this like something you see in other creative people, or am I an anomaly?
No, it's just you, Ryan. Sorry.
Yeah, you're one of one, pal.
Yeah. Good thing you're a therapist. No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you guys have said it. You know, the fear of that chaos is, and perfectionism. Perfectionism, also, the way I think about it, it's not actually trying to get things perfect. It's the looping over and over and over about everything that might go wrong. Right. And so it's actually sort of an avoidant state more than anything. It's not actually a productive state. It's an avoidant state. Right. And yeah, no, absolutely. Avoiding that chaos. I actually really love the process that you talked about. If you get a project and it's, you know, and you've got 3 weeks, or even if that's a manufactured deadline or self-imposed, you know, when you sort of get the project and you put some things down and you're like, I'm just going to put some marks on the page. It's going to be bad. It's going to be words, ideas, sentences, just kind of like whatever. And then I actually tell people, especially if they've got time, don't look at it for a week.
Well, there was a movement in psychology 20, 30 years ago called positive psychology, which basically the idea is that from the beginning of psychiatry and psychology, we only looked at disorder, the things that were wrong with the psyche and that would block you from happiness or fulfillment or just functioning. And positive psychology was an attempt to try to define what works, what creates actual joy, happiness, contentment, fulfillment, and how to define that in the way that we so strictly define disorder, right? And flow is an element of that, which is basically this psychologist hypothesized that most of the things we look for in terms that we think of as happiness is just the first level of just like immediate pleasure, joy, like things you might associate with having a good time in the moment with friends, which not knocking that at all. That's a part of a happy life. Getting drunk, having sex, enjoying a good meal. But basically there are higher levels of happiness that have nothing to do with feeling necessarily like an endorphin rush or dopamine hit in the moment. It has to do with the contentment that comes with being in a process that's fulfilling.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that creative people have a leg up in terms of accessing that flow state, where when you're working on your art, when you actually get past whatever blocks you have and you're in that place of creating and you're engaging with your art, whatever that may mean, you have a task at hand that's challenging. It's giving you just enough stimulation where you are not bored, right? You are feeling that you have to overcome some obstacles in order to achieve what you're trying to achieve. You feel like you have some sense of mastery over it, though, because it's something that you've spent a lot of hours cultivating, that skill. He lays out in this book a lot of different elements of what creates a flow state. But what was striking me when you were talking about this is that ruminating and worrying or thinking about starting it is not a flow state.
That's not
right?
That's not the job.
That's not the job, right?
Bryan Cranston would disagree.
It's when you actually have started something, when you actually have gotten past that thing, and what you're describing in terms of the test, when it's like you're forced to not think about what you're not doing to prepare or what you don't know. You're forced to have the task at hand that is a challenge. It's not easy, but it's a challenge that you're engaging with. And now you're in flow. And as you described, Duck, that can be almost elating, a relief, but almost like a high, a natural high that comes from, I think, is a flow state, even when you're doing something that's difficult and challenging. And that is when I think the creative process is best, is when you're engaging with it in that way, that you're being challenged and you're having to think and you're having to be creative. How do I solve this problem? And that could be painting a painting. It could be making a song. It could be in a boardroom trying to sell your product to a company. I mean, as you said, life is creative in a lot of ways that we don't necessarily think of as art. But when you're in that flow state, you're having to engage both parts of your brain, the left brain that's analytical and trying to figure out a solution to the problem, and the right brain that is more intuitive and creative and trying to read between the lines.
Even if it isn't something that is aimed towards a career or create, finishing a project. If I just sit down at the piano, I'm not doing it to write a song. I'm not doing it to practice. I'm just doing it because that's my meditation, for lack of a better word. I don't sit and breathe for 20 minutes a day, but if I just sit down and absentmindedly play the guitar or play the piano, it creates that same flow state, that you're talking about. And Mark, I was curious if that was something you always did. Like as a kid, were you painting from a young age, or was it something you found after searching to kind of find your own flow state?
I credit my artistic journey to Big Pharma.
A renowned patron of the arts.
Yes. Well, my dad is a pediatrician. And when I was a kid, I remember for some reason spending a lot of time at his office. My mom was in school. And so, I would occasionally go to work with my dad. And so he'd every week have these, pharmaceutical salesmen come in, and they'd leave piles of pads and pens and, paper at his office. And so I had nothing to do. This is the early 80s. So there's no internet, there's no iPads, there's no screens. And so all I had, with my time really was to draw or read, So I spent a lot of time drawing, and I had an older half brother who really encouraged me to not necessarily pursue art, but he really challenged me and pushed me on creating more art. He bought me my first comic book, which was Uncanny X-Men #1 back in 1980,
Nice.
whatever, which I read to shreds. Sorry, it's not in any shape anymore.
Not
but,
pristine.
No, God, no. I mean, if we're being really honest, art for me growing up was also an escape. And maybe there's something there about that being a flow state, because it was, not to say a flow state is an escape. I think there's a lot of very positive things about a flow state, and it's not an escape like drugs or alcohol where you're, sort of actively harming yourself in various ways just to, not feel, which I can also relate to. But, growing up, it was sort of I had a very intense kind of house, I grew up in Boston, and, sort of very strict, went to a good school. They sent me to private school, and it was very rigorous, and there was a lot of pressure to perform athletically, academically, and and there was other things going on at home which for me as a kid were not great. A lot of emotional pressure, and so to escape that pressure, I really dove into my art. I actually had a great art teacher who was very, very intuitive and kind of figured out, that for me, like, stuff at home wasn't great. And I don't remember if he really pushed me to do this, but I remember creating some pieces of art where he really sort of connected it with my emotional state, which I hadn't really thought about before, whatever it was, 7th grade, 8th grade. And it was, I don't know, it was confronting in a way, to sort of have someone see that, right? Like you're going to school and you're like, just show up and perform, right. And be cool. I was an all boys school.
Don't stand out.
Yeah, it was an all boys school in Boston, so feelings were not, the thing that you really showed up with. But
think you're better than me?
Yeah, exactly.
Mr. Hot Man.
Oh man, yeah. I tried to have a Boston accent for a while, and then I realized that most of the kids who had Boston accents were bullying me, so I didn't really. I moved away from that. But it was, but it was in many ways an escape, and. It's funny. I think you said positive psychology. There's this other thing. Have you ever heard of positive intelligence? But there's also lots of psychology that points to this. Brene Brown stuff and all this stuff. That's like, these traits that we have as kids. And this shows up with a lot of my clients. Like, again, I'm not a therapist. So if someone really is struggling in a way that a therapy would help, I will send them there. But if we're able to sort of integrate this stuff and look at the future, but a lot of the tools that we have or ways that we were necessary for our childhoods, whether that was good or bad. Maybe you had a great childhood and good for you. You still had things that you did to fit in your childhood, in your family, with the adults in your life. And some of those things are still good. Like I'm still, I was people pleasing has always been, a thing for me. Not having my own boundaries has always been a thing for me. And in certain contexts, that's great. But as a grown up, it's started to, pose some real problems. Yeah. It started to really get in my way, of my own success. I had a story about my success that was given to me by the adults in my life, that success was actually something to both strive for and avoid. Like talk about a paradox. It was like all this pushing to be successful and to get these things, and then you get it, and it was almost like nothing was ever really good enough. It was always like, oh, but you could have done more, and it could have been whatever. But with art, I don't know, what are you going to say? Like, could have been a better painting. What do you know? It was like it was mine. My art teacher was very supportive. Obviously that was great. And I didn't have somebody, at least in the classroom, saying you're a crap artist. But the only feeling that I could get from creating that art, whether it was in myself or even from my family, was positive, which at least for that, I'm grateful for. But yeah, it's an interesting, I know I sort of took the question all over the place, but
that's the point. And for whatever reason, the thing that it's still resonating with me, and it just brought up a sense memory, and I don't know if it had the same effect for you guys, was going to my parents' work. That feeling of being a little special, like this is my mom's office.
Yeah.
You were there sort of peeking in. Did you guys have that same experience that I had? Of like when you got to go to your parents' job where you were proud of them and you were sort of like, you felt like a mini version of them, and you were like, I can do it. I can sit at the big desk. I can do, it's such a great sense memory for me. I never thought about it until that moment.
I knew from a very early age that I did not want to do what my dad does.
Yeah.
From my dad's an attorney, and from my perspective, basically, his job was yelling and screaming a lot on the phone. That was basically, I was like, I don't think I want to do that.
Gotcha.
Didn't seem very creative to me, but it probably was creative. You had to find ways to get the contract signed.
But Mark, did you see your father in like as a superhero, a pediatrician, saving kids and doing all those great things?
He really was, like, at his job, he was absolutely, I always remember like a sense of pride. I'd call, I mean, so, as I said, childhood was not perfect. So there were a lot of days when I'd get to school and I'd be really upset about whatever happened, that morning. And my dad would leave early for work. So I call him at work. And this is it's a painful memory in some ways because, I was feeling like shit, really. But I call my dad, and there is that special feeling of calling and going, I'm looking for Dr. Scheff. This is Marc Scheff, and they go, oh, Mark, I'll get your father right now.
Yeah.
And it was just,
from that,
it was nice.
From
like,
that payphone in the hallway.
Yeah. Exactly. Payphone in the hallway.
Yeah.
And it felt special because, sometimes I call and I go, I'm looking for Dr. Scheff. They go, oh, he's in with a patient. I go, well, it's his son. They go, oh, hold on a minute. And maybe I'd wait a minute or two or whatever, but he'd always make, he would always, or almost always, I remember him making time for me. And that was very special. And, he's a funny guy. And I always, I sort of looked up to his sense of, just his sense of his fearlessness with his humor. Cause it was corny dad humor. Right. And sure. I just, of course, as a teenager, we're like, oh, dad, but at the same time, like I look back and I'm like, man, he was just like, he would just crack it, like whatever lame joke it was, like he would just lay it on. And he didn't care if his kids were judging him or, his wife rolled her eyes or whatever. And I got to see him, not obviously I wasn't in with his patients, but I got to see him interacting with patients sometimes in, outside in the reception room or whatever. And just so, so kind and gentle. And he was helping people. Yeah. And more than just sort of like, okay, what's wrong? I'm going to fix the problem. He was also approaching it from an emotional level. Like the way he spent a lot of time really whether he knew it or not, really thinking about how do I put someone at ease, in this space so that we really can have the best result. And I think that applies to, if it's whether it's a creative career or your own career or whatever. And like I said at the very beginning, sometimes it's the sense of unease from everything else that can kind of get you. I mean, if you've ever, had an argument with a partner or a kid where they're like, like my son, who's 14 and bless his heart, if something's important to him now, it is the most important thing for everyone,
absolutely.
Like I'll start getting, I have to turn off my phone sometimes. Like I'll start getting texts, Daddy, did you get my request for, whatever, something, food, money, like whatever. And, and I'll be like, yeah, I got the request. I'll do it later, but can you just do it now? But can you just do it now? But can you just do it now? And I think, and I'm not trying to psychoanalyze him, but he's a teenager. There's stuff's uneasy everywhere, and so like, I mean, you can't really coach or therapize your own family, but I would love to sit down and be like, bro, as he likes to call me, like, let's look at, or bruh, let's look at what's really bothering you right now. It's not that you don't have the $10 that I owe you or whatever. It's like, let's look at this other stuff. Obviously he's 14 and we're not there yet. But I think when I think about my dad, I mean, there's a lot of complex feelings, but when I think about, like you were talking about the sort of like, okay, so we can look at the diagnosis and we're real good at figuring out what's wrong. And how did we get through those times? Mm-hmm. My dad is I'm not a perfect dad. Nobody's a perfect parent. Ask Abramate, he'll tell you. But, but there were a lot of things that he did that I do want to hold on to. He's an incredibly patient man. He's incredibly kind. He doesn't always do those things perfectly, but those are parts of him and his humor. And if I could take, just a couple of things from him, I would take those things.
That's what we do. We kind of cherry pick those the best things that our parents try to hand down to us, and we overlook the shortcomings because as we get older, we realize that we're fallible too, and we have I don't want my son to take my temper or whatever, but I want him to take my compassion or my love. You know what I mean?
I have a question for you guys. I don't have an answer to this, and I actually wonder if maybe Ryan or Duck, if you do. But I work with a lot of creatives, and I wonder, and I don't have the numbers on this, like, is sort of adverse childhood experiences or tough childhoods, is that a marker for creativity? Because I feel like, most people that I work with as creatives, we are working not around, but sort of to integrate, whether it's, actual big T trauma or sort of what do they call it? Complex, PTSD, or like any of these things, or just like, I had a tough time with my parents in a sort of normal way. Is there a connection there? Like, I kind of wonder about that.
It is a requirement to be a stand-up comedian.
Okay. Yeah. Well, right. Yeah.
Well, I think, I mean, I'll admit I'm not a data analytics research guy, so I can't quote you, stats and figures, but I can tell you that I do think there is a correlation in my experience and the literature that I've read. And I think that the reason why, if I were to venture a hypothesis, is that, again, we all have the capacity to be creative in one way or another. Some people are more oriented that way than others. And it's on a spectrum between, sort of right brain and left brain leaning. However, children, and part of the reason why we do like play therapy or art therapy with kids is because the way that children figure out how to navigate the world is through play. That is their first language and their first coping mechanism, right? And the fantasy world in their mind is the way in which, because they don't have the life experience to have things to compare it to.
Can't be like, this is like my last job, I'm 5.
Right. Exactly. So your
although
fantasy
child labor
world
is making a comeback, so who knows? Maybe we could see.
Speaking of trauma.
Yeah, right.
When you think back to being a kid, it's like, it took so little to entertain you or to give you stimulation because you have so much richness in your imagination of ways to create a storyline, create a narrative, a way to, if you just watch a kid play, they're playing out everything that's going on around them. That's why we give them dolls and toys to play with in therapy, because you can see the choices they make. Things will emerge that might be with their parents, it might be with a bully at school, and they're not even aware. In the same way that you said, you made art and then somebody pointed out to you, like, how this connects.
Dark.
Yeah.
What's going on at home? There's a lot of blood in this picture.
Yeah.
Well, it's too anxiety inducing when you're young to just try to grapple with those emotions. You can't even understand those emotions. So you put them in your play, in your fantasy world. And so I think that what happens when there is trauma when you're young, I think when there are challenges, you have to be more creative. You have to use that part of your brain more to cope. And to a certain degree, that's very adaptive, because you're finding ways through a hard situation creatively. In the extreme, it can become disorder because, for instance, dissociation, where you're escaping completely to another reality, and that can become PTSD.
A great Netflix show. Oh, no, sorry.
Yeah. Well, dissociative identity disorder, meaning that you've created an entire different reality, a different part that you're living in. That's adaptive if your reality is so horribly tragic that you need to find a way to get through it by creating this other reality. But later in life, that maybe is something that can become maladaptive. However, within the realm of coping, I think creative people emerge because they found a way through all of that trauma. They had to be creative. They had to find, and then that also fosters your fantasy world, your imagination, which is a key element of creativity. Especially people that are creating art from scratch, coming up with other worlds, coming up with ideas and things. If you don't have challenges in life, you maybe don't have to, learn that skill set as much, or not to the same degree that somebody that has had to go through hardship.
I concur.
Do you concur?
From personal experience, I concur. Because like I say, I mean, it also is a lack of, I didn't have a ton of friends to play with. So I had to create my own scenarios, create my own worlds, like you say. And to the point where it doesn't become a negative, where you are not dealing with the world at hand. But I think that just kind of transitions naturally into being a musician, being an artist, being a writer, being a painter. you get to, I see this world in my mind and I want to continue to develop it, whether it's on the page or in music. So yeah, anecdotally, I see it.
Yeah. And I like what you guys are saying. It's a way of, or at least when I applied to these art therapy schools and read all this stuff, it is at least sort of whether if you're making and I guess writing in a way, if you're doing sort of creative writing, like it's a kind of nonverbal communication when you're creating something on your own. And writing is not, I mean, you're not actually verbal, you're writing things, but certainly like expressive art or even for my art is mostly representational. It's we joke, my wife is an abstract artist, so we joke that like I do stuff that looks like stuff and she does stuff that doesn't look like stuff, but but either way, just sort of sinking deep. And you said something earlier too. I think as you develop some skill and whether it's mastery or just in that what do they, oh god, I'm going to blank on this, conscious competence, this framework, when you start building a skill, you start with unconscious incompetence, like you're bad and you just don't have any idea why.
You don't know it.
You're right. And then there's like conscious incompetence where you're like, I've learned a few things, but now I know why I'm bad. And, then you go to conscious competence where like you were saying before, where, you've got some skill, you got to kind of focus on it. And then you get to unconscious incompetence. And then above that is mastery. But unconscious incompetence is, I think, something we've all experienced, with whatever it is in our lives, whether it's, parenting or relationships or art, where, there's a bunch of steps that we've sort of chunked down, that we no longer have to think about them as individual steps, like, this is maybe a terrible example, but I think about like, this is a bad example, but you'll get it. Like driving home from my high school girlfriend, I would drive home from her house and it was always late because I was trying to just get right at curfew, and I didn't have to, I should have paid more attention. I didn't have to think exactly about how I was going to do it. Like, okay, I'm looking out for the right turn here, and I'm looking out for the left turn here, and then I spend this much time on Route 9. I could just sort of do it without thinking. And similarly, like if you're writing or if you're drawing and you're sort of learning a new way to create work, like Dali probably didn't have to think about like how would a clock look when it's dripping after 50 he's just like now I know how to do that, and I'm going to put it together. I'm going to take that chunk of this group of things that I can now just sort of do on autopilot and see if I can chunk it together with some other things. And now I'm in a conscious competence area somewhere else, and you start to develop, sort of chunk these things together. Mm-hmm. I have no idea where I was going with that, but it's I felt like
I like how, because we touched on it before, but it's like when you saw Picasso was a master of realism, and only once he mastered that, he could go to absurdism, and things could suddenly become surreal. And so I think it's a good same thing with like a musician who might be in a genre of music that you think is cheesy and not particularly skillful. If you ever see them just sit down and suddenly play this virtuistic the concerto, you're like, oh my god, that guy's a trained piano player, something like that. It's always a cool reminder that there's a lot of work that went in long before we ever got to see the finished product.
It's interesting that you brought up Picasso, because earlier when we were talking about sketches and putting something on the page and then having to
refine,
throw it away or start over or refine was there. And I was lucky enough to go see it when we were on tour in Madrid, Spain. We went to, is it the Prado Museum? Is that what it's called? I forget what it's called. Where they have Guernica, his biggest and most famous painting about the revolution and the Civil War. I was astonished. It almost made me uncomfortable because how advanced he must have been at that process that we're describing, because they had not just Guernica on one wall, but around the other walls, all of the sketches that had been discarded from the beginning that he had saved, and then photographs of previous versions of it that he had painted over. So underneath on this canvas that you're looking at, the finished product, were things that he drew or painted and then drew and painted over it. Like, I don't even want to save this. I'm just going to use the same canvas and throw more paint on top of it. And this is Picasso. So like, if he had taken that sketch, that's millions of dollars right there. They could have been, I don't know if he knew that at the time, but just like realizing this master who the entire point was the chaos of it.
Yeah.
Right? You look at the finished product, and what you're seeing is something that's supposed to make you feel really uncomfortable, because it's the worst thing that humanity has ever wrought, and the impact of fascism and, what it wrought in the 20th century. And he came up with one version of it, and it wasn't chaotic enough, and he had to refine that and find, where is the perfection in that? It's just trying to create something that creates a feeling, and just feeling the impulse to take it further, and when are you done? Obviously he had some vision, and at some point he said, I've completed my vision. But anyway, I was just thinking about that. We were talking about that earlier.
Van,
you mentioned
Van
Picasso,
Gogh, which is pronounced Van Gogh, I think.
Yeah,
Van Gogh,
the German pronunciation,
said that art is never truly finished; it's merely abandoned. Which I think speaks to this. And I've actually had I used to teach art, like how to draw and paint and stuff, and I remember this one student who would come in just with honestly some of the most beautiful sketches I've ever seen. Really kind of this like balance of like chaos and order, and they were not like rendered, but they looked really, they were so beautiful. And he would do the same thing. He'd come in every week and he'd sort of have painted over the thing. I'm going, what are you doing? If you're Picasso, you can do whatever you want. But like, I think there's a real, there is value, and you don't have to keep it around forever. But one thing that kind of, that I do like to look through my old sketchbooks, not to be like, oh man, but to be like, oh man, I have gotten so much better. It's nice. It's nice to look back and say, and this is a thing that happens with creatives a lot, because now we have access to everything all the time, forever. And so, it's very, very easy. And Picasso lived in a different time. So who knows what that same person would be doing if they were that same age in 2025. But we live at a time where we can compare ourselves to everybody at all times. And I think, Ryan, I heard in one of your podcasts, or maybe this one, talking about when you sort of, when you left the band and started getting into what you're doing now, seeing the band doing what it's doing. And there's that comparison happening, even a little bit then. But we can do that all the time with lots of other people. I can do it with you. Oh, these guys have done some like truly amazing stuff. I haven't like hit that. But if we look back at where we were, like if I look at where I was in 2020 before I made my transition, I can go, oh, you know what, you do actually have some skill. It's like, actually, I love this example because like in the jiu-jitsu gym, I remember, I was, when you start, you're the worst, probably. And everyone is winning. I remember the first time we had a new white belt come in, and I maybe, I'd been there for a couple of months maybe, but it was the first time that I couldn't really compare against myself because I am myself, and it's hard to sort of in that context. But to have someone come in and essentially be a 3 months earlier me, I was able to kind of go, oh yeah, actually, you know what, I know some stuff. And that looking back and that kind of, self comparison, I like to use, and especially, in the coaching work that I do, because it does feel motivating, when you can kind of look at your skill and really appreciate the path. Yeah, you may have goals and you may have destinations, and maybe you'll reach them and maybe you never will. I don't know. Life is, what does Oliver Berkman say? We got like 4,000 weeks. Like, let's just, let's keep it moving. Mm-hmm. Great. But have you read this book? Without hesitation, say that everyone, especially everyone in our general age group, should read and will enjoy this book. It's a beautiful kind of lens on things like productivity and other things. But if I were to sum up, he says this in the book, but if I were to sort of sum up the book, he's like, we have 4,000 weeks. If you live to like 75, like that's about, what you get. So if you think about all the things that one could do in the world and all the things that people have done in the world, there's no way that you're going to do all of them. So why try? And here's how to like not try, but still be actually like happy and successful in doing what you're actually going to do. Because I think one thing that gets in the way, especially for creatives, like we're so imaginative, and we can imagine all the things that we want to do. And then we can kind of have the thoughts on thoughts, like you said, like we can be like, but I've got all these ideas and I can just look at all the things I'm not doing, which is terrible. Like it's just, go on.
What's the name of the book, Mark?
It's called 4,000 Weeks.
Okay.
And he's got a couple other books, which there's one called I forget, it's something for people who hate positive thinking. He's smart and he's funny and it really gave me it was a nice thing to read and kind of feel like a sense of ease over like, it's okay. This is where I am. We talked about this with the cast. Like, this is where I am and this is how things are. Do I wish it was different? Can we analyze that? Sure, let's do that. But what are the options that I have right now? And what do I really want to be focusing on? And yeah, I'll have that list of things that are maybe someday, somewhere, possibly. But it's not for me to spend all of my time worrying about what's not happening.
Marc, this has been a really great conversation. Thank you so much for your time and your energy and your creativity in having this conversation. Yeah, this is great. So tell us, before we wrap up and leave you, where can people find you? What else, anything else you're working on that you want people to know about?
Sure. I mean, you can find me if you Google my name, Marc Scheff. You can find me most places. The thing that I'm really working on, I'm gonna open up my heart a little bit here. I love the work.
Finally,
I know. God,
you've been the closed book up until now.
He's like, finally. Yeah. I love the work that I do, and I love the work that I do with people. And there's obviously, it's a business. Like we're all trying to, exist in a world that, where money is. We can argue about whether it's real, but it's a thing. And I've been building this creative community slowly over the last couple of years. It started with just sort of an email course, and then people wanted a way to stay connected. So I built this community, and it's been growing. It's been challenging. I've had some real challenges for myself, trying to figure out how to grow, how to let go, how to do these things. But it's a beautiful space for people to, get support as creatives. And I hesitate to even say get support, but it's just this, like we were talking about before, like it's a space where I'll put it this way. One of the people in the club said this. They said, and she's very sort of prolific on the internet. She's like, the internet gets, 85% of me. Like I give a lot, to the internet, putting stuff out there, being really open. And she's like, this place that I've created gets the other 25%, gets the full send, which really means a lot to me, because I don't feel like I always had that, especially growing up. I feel like I found community after going to college again, after, art school. And it was years later that I discovered community and how powerful it was in my creative growth. And so, if I could, and what I'm really working to is I'm working to grow this space so that it can be really the only thing that I'm doing, because there's so much beauty and there's so many, breakthroughs and people getting past, whatever it is that, that they need to get past, and getting support, whether it's in a one-on-one conversation or just sort of being in the room with other people on the various chats. So I love the work that I do, and I'm really investing a lot of my soul really into this project. So with all of that, it's called the Unleash Creativity Club. So if people go to unleashcreativity.club, there's, if we're not doing right now, we have the doors open. We're inviting new people in. We do it every, few months. So if it's not that time, there's a mailing list. And, and if people are curious what it's about, I encourage them, you can get on the mailing list. You can reply to anything that I send, and I reply to everything personally. So
the highly exclusive .club suffix.
Yes, indeed.
Very, very rare. They only give it out to a very few. Well, you got to go. I think the police are here for you, Marc.
Can you hear that?
Yeah, it's all right.
Gotta run.
Hey,
guys,
art is
this has
dangerous.
been such a great conversation. I really feel like, God, I want to see you guys every day now. This has been really, really energizing.
We'll set up a daily call.
Well, I can see you every day on your podcast. I can do that.
There you go.
That's true. No, the feeling is mutual, Marc. This was really a fascinating and fun conversation, man. It's fun to connect in this way with a like-minded creative person, and I know that the people you work with are in good hands. So thank you for sharing your thoughts and your feelings today with us. And guest today has been Marc Scheff right here on the Harder to Breathe podcast. Join us every Tuesday for new episodes. If you'd like to ask us a question that we would answer in one of our intros, send us an email at hardertobreathepodcast@gmail.com. We'll see you next Tuesday right here on the Harder to Breathe podcast.